I mean, we can clearly see why, but we learned through a hearing of a House Oversight Committee in US Congress today that an organization called the National Endowment for Democracy, which is funded by the US government, which exists to promote regime change around the world by sponsoring so-called civil society groups, media, activists, training, journalists, funding political parties, has now identified Iran as its top target. And its president today was asked about an apparently secret State Department program by the ranking Democratic chair of this House Oversight Committee to smuggle Starlink into Iran. And he declared that the National Endowment for Democracy had already deployed 200 Starlink terminals into Iran. And then he was promptly cut off by the chair of the committee because he had said too much. So we picked this up at the Gray Zone. We have the video out there. This president of this National Endowment for Democracy president's name is Damon Wilson. We've reported for years on the endowment, also known as the NED, and their subversive activities around the globe. And now we know how deeply they were involved in these riots. Wilson also took credit for the death tolls and said they're working with their partners who have networks inside Iran to basically increase the official death toll to anywhere between 17,000 and 30,000. This is while Western mainstream media resorts to monarchist sources close to Reza Pahlavi to jack up the death toll to 36,000 without any verification. So now we can see kind of how the sausage is made. And we see it not only behind closed doors, but in a congressional committee where the president of this regime change organization, the regime change arm of the US government, apparently said too much.
You know, in those days, I was in Iran, Max. As you've mentioned, the first 2 days were so calm. People were protesting. They were somehow, you know, they wanted to show some sort of, you know, objection to the situation with the economy, which was, after all, you know, the U.S. Treasury Secretary said what of the, you know, they have tried to do everything to bring down the Iranian currency, which was the outcome. The protest was the outcome of what they've done in the United States. And then you see the protests turning into riots. So strange to me, because in that particular moment, in those days, the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, he tried to talk with these, you know, with the economists, with the, you know, the elites of Bazaar, as they call it, the elite of market there. And suddenly something happened on the ground and they have changed everything. The nature of the protests turned into riots and they start burning everything. That was so strange for me to witness.
Yeah, and that's when the pressure built on Trump to do something. On the 14th of January, it was either the 12th or the 14th, which is after the internet blackout, which revealingly stopped these violent riots, and the shutdown of Starlink, which obviously the rioters were using to coordinate unrest. Donald Trump came under all this pressure to do something or say something, but U.S. military assets were not in place. He had just kidnapped Maduro. The USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier battle group was still in the Caribbean. The Abraham Lincoln battle carrier group was not in place. But Trump then declared help is on the way. And this fueled the belief among the Iranian opposition that the US was going to intervene, and it trapped Donald Trump. And it was from that point that Trump had to authorize these 2 aircraft carrier battle groups to put them into place, that he then restarted these negotiations, which led to war in June, and began playing the Israelis' game, became basically a marionette for Benjamin Netanyahu. So that was the utility, that was the purpose of these regime change riots. And we can now see how a US government entity, the National Endowment for Democracy, had kind of laid the groundwork for unrest and insurrection in Iran. There was also the assessment that we cited at the Gray Zone from Stratfor, which is known as the private CIA at the time, which was very accurate, referring to the riots as a bridge to a potential U.S. military intervention. They said these riots will not lead to regime change, but they may lead to a regime change war, and that's basically the purpose of them. However, if there is a regime change war, all protests will end. But they had basically been ended because of the internet blackout. So that's where we are right now in the United States. Here in Washington, Trump is preparing for his State of the Union address, and he's going to talk about Iran. The Olympics, the Winter Olympics have just ended. Couldn't have done the war during the Olympics. All of the military assets that the U.S. can muster appear to be in place. They may not be enough, but that's what the U.S. has. And Israel is preparing its own plan of attack in coordination with the U.S. So we have really reached an inflection point. The only other date this week that I think is relevant or event is negotiations on Thursday, I believe, in Geneva. And this is where Trump and Witkoff and Kushner are telling the Iranians that if you don't essentially capitulate, in Witkoff's own words, if you do not capitulate, then we will attack you.
Yeah. Here is Witkoff said something about the nuclear program of Iran, which somehow is so familiar for me from what we've heard for many years from Benjamin Netanyahu. Here is what Witkoff said. So if the situation is so dire, then you have to negotiate, you have to talk instead of sending a lot of weapons to the region in order to put pressure. It seems that in the mind of the Trump administration, that the Iranian government, the Iranian people would somehow capitulate but that's not going to happen, Max. These people have no idea what is happening in Iran and how people are so much prepared for they're prepared to negotiate, they're prepared for war if the United States decides to attack them. And after all, they're talking about Thursday, as you've mentioned. I don't know how much of outcome are we going to get on Thursday, because it's not that much promising when you you send a lot of weapons to the region. And the only outcome, what is your assessment of the current situation? It's so fragile. I think even a false flag operation can bring a new war in the Middle East. What is your understanding of that?
It's been reported today that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are going to make the determination on whether there should be war based on their assessment of the negotiations and whether they can go forward. So you have two adherents of the Zionist movement who are deeply invested in the project of Zionism. Jared Kushner much more than Steve Witkoff, but Witkoff's family is integrated into this network of pro-Zionist business interests and elites. But Jared Kushner, as a boy, his parents hosted Benjamin Netanyahu. He would have to get out of his bed so Netanyahu could stay over at their house. He was practically in bed with Netanyahu. So this is who's left to make this determination. Jared Kushner holds no position in the U.S. government. It wasn't even made known to Trump's supporters or even those in Trump's inner circle that Jared Kushner would be playing a role in this administration. And he comes out of nowhere. And now it's up to him to make what will be, I think, one of the most fateful decisions of our lifetimes, and certainly of the Trump administration. Will he decide that Trump will go taco, as Trump's opponents call him? Trump always chickens out, and that he'll remove all of these military assets and disappoint Netanyahu, because Netanyahu will never be able to get this many U.S. military assets and this level of force posture around Iran, probably again for the rest of his life, with a president in office who controls both chambers of Congress through his party, who is essentially a vehicle for Israeli influence through the donations, hundreds of millions of dollars from Miriam Adelson and Paul Singer and other Zionist MAGA-oriented billionaires. this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for Netanyahu. And if Trump chickens out, if Trump finds an off-ramp, which would actually be the right thing to do, not just politically or diplomatically, but also militarily for the US, if he does not do that, the Israelis will be furious. And as you mentioned, they could take they could go for some black operations, a false flag. They could just directly attack Iran too, as they did in June. And that's the other issue with these negotiations. Leaving aside the deep ideological investment that the US negotiating team has in the project of Zionism, Israel is just this wild card. And Israel now recognizes correctly, this is coming out in Israeli media, that Iran militarily is reaching parity with its own military. Israel's been gifted every gadget and high-tech investment possible by the most powerful empire in human history, along with a de facto air bridge of JDAMs and high-powered bombs and F-35s and F-18s, F-15s. They have the most powerful air force other than the US. They have one of the most powerful air forces in the world. And yet they have been forced to recognize after the 12-day war that Iran, through its ballistic missile program, is able to fight it to a standoff and force it into demanding a ceasefire. And that since the 12-day war, Iran has not only replenished its stocks of ballistic missiles, it has exceeded its pre-existing stock and produced more mobile missile launching systems, as well as more underground de facto military bases for its ballistic missiles and its thousands of drones, as well as its sea mines. And Iran also has drone-like sea mines that can actually move to avoid mine sweeping systems. Its military, which is mostly developed on an indigenous basis, but now receiving new support, which is mostly unknown to me, from Russia and China, and accepting that support, is stronger than ever. So those who have said Iran is at its weakest point, I've even seen some analysts that I consider to be credible say Iran is now at its weakest point, are getting it wrong. The Israelis understand that. I linked to, on Twitter, an article in Israel's most widely read paper, Yediot Aharonot, declaring that Israeli officials are urgently briefing and pushing their U.S. military counterparts to attack Iran because they are so worried about the nature of Iran's ballistic missile program. So these riots and all the which were triggered partly by the economic assault by the U.S. on Iran's economy through sanctions. They projected this, they created this sense that Iran is weak, that Iran's on the ropes internally. But the Israelis understand that militarily Iran is getting too strong. And that's why I think even if there are negotiations now that succeed, it's only delaying the inevitable. As long as there is this greater Israel project right there in the region, war is ultimately inevitable with Iran, and the pressure on any U.S. president, the preponderance of pressure, particularly on a Republican like Trump, will simply be insurmountable for that president to attack.
Yeah. We've seen that the Pentagon finally is talking about that the war with Iran gonna take, that's gonna prolong. That's gonna be it's not gonna be a quick war, a quick attack. That's gonna happen, and the huge casualties may this war bring to the United States. And here is the Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Dan Kane. He warned Donald Trump himself, that considering that what would be the main goal? And in your opinion, when it comes to the Trump administration, how do you see the combination of forces? On one side, we see General Kane coming out and saying, if you start this war, it's going to be a continuous war. it's going to be a new war in the Middle East that may take a decade. On the other hand, you see people like, Lindsey Graham, people like those people who are mostly pro-war, and they want to bring a new war in the Middle East in favor of Israel and using the United States as a proxy against Iran. How do you see the combination of these forces within the Trump administration?
Well, let's start with Lindsey Graham. He's another vehicle for Israeli influence. You can clearly see that. He's made 2 trips to Tel Aviv already this year. And while he makes his trips to Tel Aviv, Netanyahu makes his trips to Washington. They trade places. And it's kind of like this shell game, this 3-card Monte game, where you can't tell who's the Israeli and who's the American. But by trading places, they create this chorus that Trump hears that he must attack Iran. Netanyahu's meeting with all his allies in Washington. He's providing Trump and his team with all sorts of intelligence, hyping up Iran's imminent nuclear capacity. Steve Witkoff declared this week that Iran's a week away from a nuclear bomb. That's obviously coming from the Israelis. As we speak right now, at 3:00, Marco Rubio, National Security Council Director and Secretary of State, has convened an Iran meeting, and the CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, is right in there. This other Lindsey Graham-like figure who, as I wrote about last year, is known inside the administration as the Mossad stenographer, because he just gets briefings from the Mossad and then feeds it right to the president. Susie Wiles is the chief of staff, who will make sure that there are no dissenters in these meetings. Tucker Carlson, who fresh off dismantling U.S. ambassador to Israel, or I can't tell, is he the Israeli ambassador to the U.S.? Mike Huckabee in Jerusalem, in a 2-hour interview, appeared at the White House. And I mean, anybody could guess that why Tucker was there. He wasn't there to, eat Burger King with Donald Trump. He was there to lobby Trump against a war on Iran and warn of the consequences, and to stand in the shoes of Charlie Kirk, the late TPUSA leader, who last year tried to warn Trump and was rebuked by the president himself very angrily for warning about war with Iran. I think I was the first journalist to reveal that. So there are competing forces, but these are political forces. Pete Hegseth, he's the Secretary of War, what was once known as the Secretary of Defense. I like this new title, actually. It's more honest about what the Pentagon is. Hegseth will do anything that these forces tell him to do. He just wants to maintain his position. He was recently training with some military cadets, benching what appeared to be like fake weights, claiming he was benching 350 pounds. I don't know if he's on a cycle of steroids or the weights were fake, but it doesn't matter. These kind of spectacles show that Pete Hegseth is not serious, and that the serious people are in the procurement wing of the Pentagon, who have to determine how many military assets are available, and especially how much standoff capacity the U.S. can actually muster, and for how long, against a military like Iran. The serious people in the Pentagon are in the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, military intelligence, who determine what Iran's capacity is, its own standoff capacity, its ability to withstand strikes, etc. They are not at the top, at the political level. And then you have the Pentagon brass. These are the generals, including Dan Kane, who have had to deal with the DIA and deal with the procurement side and know the numbers. They're sort of like numbers guys. Kane, I assume, also is more ideologically MAGA than Mark Milley or other previous CENTCOM chiefs, but he's looking at the cold, hard facts, and he is recognizing that this war may not be winnable with some lightning assault on Iran, that it could drag out for weeks or months without even achieving regime change, killing possibly tens of thousands, causing an economic crisis globally, possibly destabilizing regional family dictatorships in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. But for him, it's a question of whether it's militarily winnable or not. I don't think he's even considering political or moral questions. It's whether they can do the job and what Iran can do back. And he leaked, or someone around him leaked, to three major outlets in the US, that the Pentagon Joint Chiefs essentially are concerned, if not in opposition to launching this war. So for Trump to do this, it would just be another confirmation that this is a war for Israel, for the ideological elements that have captured the White House and which do not represent the American public, which opposes this war in vast numbers. About 70% of the US public opposes this war. I think 95% of registered Democrats oppose it. It's not representing even the American military, which has now expressed its opposition. It's representing this faction of ideological zealots who are adherents to the project of Greater Israel and the fundamentally destabilizing philosophy of Zionism.
Actually, Tucker Carlson brought this up in his interview with Mike Huckabee. Said that most Americans don't want the war with Iran. And Mike Huckabee's answer was somehow amazing, that he said that it's not that much important for the United States, for the president of the United States to consider that. What is the process? Are they not really considering that the situation with their elections, are they really concerned about that, or that's not that or they can sacrifice everything for the sake of Israel?
I mean, if Donald Trump is and the US military in tandem with Israel are able to strike Iran and achieve some results similar to Venezuela, they'd be putting all their doubters to shame, and they would improve their chances in 2028 for sure. And Ben Shapiro would declare victory over Charlie Kirk and Tucker Carlson, and that would be it. But that's not likely to happen. I mean, I can't see it happening so cleanly. By the way, the US did not achieve regime change in Venezuela. It was basically a special forces operation to extract or kidnap one figure and his wife. Could they even achieve that inside Iran? I don't know. But achieving regime change, I think, even the man on the street in the US has some vague understanding of the resiliency of the Islamic Republic, and that it can't just be removed through waves of JDAMs in 72 hours, and that it's going to be a bloody affair and may cost the lives of many American service members, including members of the crew of the USS Gerald Ford, which had to dock yesterday in Crete, on the island of Crete, just so they could clear their bowels because the toilet system had completely backed up and was overflowing. So politically, Trump is walking on a knife's edge. There would be nothing more disastrous for Trump than losing several hundred US service members or triggering an economic crisis for a war that more and more Americans understand would be on behalf of Israel. I don't know what he's thinking. It doesn't look like he is thinking much. As I mentioned in the beginning of our discussion, Trump trapped himself on whether, I think it was January 12th, when he said help is on the way and told Iranians he's going to do something. And then the air bridge and all the military assets and most of the US Air Force and over 1/3 of US naval assets followed. So he's trapped. And who's trapping him? Who's doing the trapping? Figures like Marco Rubio, who have the ability to deploy those assets as the director of the National Security Council. Figures whose careers have been propelled by Zionist oligarchs like Paul Singer. There's another factor here that I think is more psychological, and I try to focus more on material factors like pro-Israel donations or the military industrial complex. But I think personality is always a factor in everything Trump does. And Trump has been the target of many assassination plots. One actually took place 2 days ago, apparently, when someone who is listed as a missing person just happened to wander into Mar-a-Lago, Trump's estate in West Palm Beach, with a shotgun and a can of gasoline, and he was shot by Secret Service. We remember when Trump was a candidate, there were 2 assassination plots, including one that missed his cranium with a bullet by a few millimeters. And, there's a sense among the MAGA base that those assassination investigations have been buried by Trump's FBI after these massive security failures by his Secret Service. And there's a sense within the Trump family, and I know this, that this is their belief. I'm not saying it's my belief. I don't know. These could have just, Tyler Robinson, who killed Charlie Kirk, Thomas Crooks, who nearly killed Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, Ryan Routh, who was recruiting for the Ukrainian military in Ukraine and then shows up at Mar-a-Lago waiting outside with a sniper rifle and is arrested. These figures could have all just been lone wolf lunatics. It's a little bit odd that they just keep coming at Trump, but the belief within the Trump family is that they are being targeted by them. You hear them say, they tried to kill Eric Trump, for example, Donald Trump's son. He said, they tried to impeach my president, my father. They waged lawfare against my father. They came up with a phony Russian hoax against my father. And now they're trying to kill him with these assassination plots. He actually said that in a CNN interview last year. So who is they? Who does the Trump family see as they? They clearly believe that there is a they that is trying to kill them, and that the they is very powerful. And so I'm able to deduce from that Trump is concerned that if he doesn't follow the program, which he is increasingly following, betraying so many of his campaign promises, including on issues of war and peace, that he's more at risk and that his security team cannot protect him. His family absolutely believes that the security team responsible for so many failures, especially in Butler, Pennsylvania, cannot protect him. And watching what happened to Charlie Kirk must have frightened Donald Trump. And when did it happen to Charlie Kirk? At a time when Charlie Kirk was going off the pro-Israel reservation, losing multi-million-dollar donations to TPUSA, and lobbying the president against war with Iran. Do I have evidence that Israel was responsible for killing Charlie Kirk? No, but that's not the point of the comments I'm making here. All I'm trying to do is get into the head of Donald Trump. And I know for a fact that his family believes that they are being targeted by powerful forces.
Recently, Tom Brock, the U.S. envoy to Turkey, said that Israel must revise its strategy in the region because we as the United States cannot go and fight each and every war on the part of Israel, because there are more than 1 billion Muslims, 2 billion Muslims, that we cannot fight each and everybody in favor of Israel. And what has happened during the interview that Tucker Carlson had with Mike Huckabee, this argument that Greater Israel means that the whole Middle East being part of Israel, it's so strange, because after all, how long does the United States want to fight these endless wars in the Middle East? And these are the recipe for disaster. Considering what's going on with the economy of the United States, the competition between the United States and China, between the East and the West. Let me play the part that Mike Huckabee, suggesting his idea about Greater Israel. That had a lot of repercussions among the Arab states in the Persian Gulf. Your understanding of that?
Well, the Arab states, who are essentially vassals, or have been vassals and were expected to normalize with Israel are now understanding, thanks to Tucker's intervention and Mike Huckabee's revealing commentary, which is just a simple elucidation of Christian Zionist ideology, not theology, ideology, that Israel has the right to control all of their territory, essentially anywhere where the Hebrews walked in the Bible, where there are Jewish holy sites in the Bible, according to Huckabee's ideology, is where it can be and should be greater Israel. But this is something Iran has understood, and has understood for decades, that there is a greater Israel project, that Israel is not a nation that will ever set borders, and that while it may not seek to necessarily control all the territory between the Nile and the Euphrates, the greater Israel will seek to control all of the governments and all of the people through some form of force. And Iran has understood that it will also use proxies or forces like Sunni extremist forces to destabilize that area in order to achieve control, which is why Qasem Soleimani sent the IRGC to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria. It wasn't only about ISIS, but his message was, if we don't fight them on our periphery, we will be fighting them inside our country. Israel achieves its goal of regime change. Yes, Iranians will see their country fragmented. It will no longer be the same country it was. There will be civil war, and there will be infiltration by these violent elements. The same thing that Lebanon has experienced since 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon. And they continue to kill Lebanese citizens as we speak. Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, articulated this in a message aimed at those very Arab states, those Sunni nations, at the recent Doha forum. He spoke for 10 minutes and clearly articulated what greater Israel means for the region, and that it means a project of total hegemony for a nation that is basically a tiny nation with no borders, which is controlled by about 7 million Israeli Jews, imposing themselves on a region of hundreds of millions of people through sheer force and brutality. And I think, those other states are beginning to understand that principle, but what do they have as leverage other than strongly worded statements like the remarkable statement led by Saudi Arabia against Mike Huckabee's more crudely articulated concept of greater Israel? But that's what the region is fighting right now. And in many ways, it's what large parts of the world are fighting, which is the concept of greater Israel. And it has no borders. We know where it starts, but we don't know where it ends. And it appears that the only thing it understands is force. And I have to go at this point, unless you want to get a quick question in.
Yeah. But just wrap it up.
Yeah.
Max, thank you so much for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thanks a lot, Nima. Great seeing you, as always.